Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep look at the very architecture of American democracy. Now, it's often celebrated as a model for the world, but as we'll see, some sources suggest it's actually facing a profound crisis from within.
So that leads us to a pretty heavy question, one that a lot of people are asking right now. To really get to the bottom of it, we can't just focus on the day-to-day political drama. We've got to look under the hood, at the system itself. I want you to think of it like this. American democracy is a massive, impressive-looking building. But what if that building has serious structural flaws on the inside? Well, to find out, we need to do a full inspector's tour, from the foundation all the way up to the penthouse. What our source materials are telling us is that this isn't just about current events. The core democratic idea of one person, one vote is being systematically undermined by the building's original blueprints. Okay, let's put on our hard hats and dive right in. We're going to go floor by floor through this whole structure to see exactly where the weak spots are. And, like any good inspection, we're starting at the very bottom with the foundation. All right, floor one. This is the ground level, the sovereign. This is where the will of the people, the voters, and the states is supposed to enter the system. It's the bedrock. But as we're about to see, there are some pretty clever ways for people to rig the entrance. One of these is what you could call the gerrymandering side door. This is a wild one. It's the practice where the party in power literally redraws the voting maps to lock in their own advantage. So in effect, the politicians end up choosing their voters instead of the other way around. And then you've got the grand main entrance itself, the Electoral College. Now, it wasn't designed for this, but today it often acts like a funhouse mirror. It distorts the national vote, creating what our sources call unequal vote weight, where mathematically a vote in one state can be worth way more than a vote in another. Okay, let's head on up to the second floor, the legislature. This is Congress, the place that's supposed to be the great engine of lawmaking in the country. But it seems to have developed a really critical structural problem of its own. And here's the thing, it's a totally self-inflicted wound. More and more, Congress has just given away, or delegated, its most basic job, writing the detailed rules and laws. And it's passed that enormous power right on up to the next floor. Which, of course, brings us to floor 3, the executive branch. This is where all that power that Congress gave up has landed. It's been collected and concentrated right here, creating this incredibly powerful administrative hub. And inside this power center, you find the executive order conveyor belt. This is a mechanism that lets the president create huge, sweeping policies with just the stroke of a pen, basically making new laws without ever having to go through Congress on the floor below. Finally, we make it to the top floor, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, and all the lower courts. Now, these are supposed to be the impartial umpires, the final arbiters of the law. But this floor has now become ground zero for some of the fiercest political battles in the entire country. And that brings us to this little feature, the nuclear option hatch. By changing the rules to allow judges to be confirmed with just a simple majority vote, the whole process of appointing people to the highest courts for life has turned into a brutal, hyper-partisan fight to stack the courts with one ideology for decades to come. Phew. Okay, so we've seen the vulnerabilities in the American blueprint. But you might be wondering, is this design normal? To get some real perspective, it's incredibly helpful to compare it to a totally different model. So the US mostly uses a winner-takes-all system. It's pretty simple. Whoever gets the most votes in a district, even by one vote, wins 100% of the power. Germany, on the other hand, uses proportional representation. There, if a party gets, say, 30% of the vote, they get roughly 30% of the seats in parliament. And this chart, man, it really spells out the long-term consequences. The math of winner takes all just naturally pushes the US into a rigid two-party system. It creates a ton of wasted votes, and that forces people into strategic voting, for the lesser of two evils. Proportional systems, though, they foster a multi-party landscape where way more people feel like their vote actually matters. So what happens when these architectural flaws we've been talking about are actively, exploited in the real world? Well, the results can end up going directly against what the majority of people actually want. And hey, it's not just political scientists pointing this out. Check this out. Here's a tweet from Donald Trump back in 2012, calling the Electoral College a disaster for democracy. That was years before that very same system would help him win the presidency.
And this is not just some academic theory. Look at this table. Twice, in just the last 25 years or so, the person who won the most votes from American citizens did not become president. That is a direct result of that distorting mirror we saw back on floor 1, the Electoral College. You know, this tendency for the system to always end up with just two dominant parties is so predictable, it actually has a name. Duverger's law. Basically, it says that winner-takes-all systems create a powerful two-part squeeze. First, there's the math, which weeds out smaller parties. And then there's the psychology. Voters know a vote for a third party is likely wasted, so they just default to one of the two big guys.
Okay, so after our whole inspection tour of the building, after diagnosing all these deep-seated problems, you have to ask the obvious question, can any of this actually be fixed? Is there a blueprint for repair? Well, some of our sources have actually laid out a pretty detailed phased-in repair plan. It starts with emergency triage, securing the ballot box first. Then it moves to major structural surgery to rein in executive power. And eventually, it gets to the really hard work of cementing these fixes at the constitutional level.
Looking at this full timeline, you can see just how massive and interconnected all these repairs would have to be. It touches every single floor of the building we just toured. And that leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. Is the architecture of American democracy actually adaptable enough to repair its own foundations, or have the cracks just gotten too deep to fix? So when you boil it all down, the crisis that sources say is facing American democracy, it isn't just about who's in charge. It's about the very design of the house they all have to live in. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.